Welcome in once again to 444's most accurate podcast. I'm Matt Okada, as you can see from the name. To my technically right is John Paulsen. John, how are you doing on this beautiful Monday?
Doing well, getting closer to the season, and happy to talk some football. Bright and early out here, Pacific, 8:30
Yep.
a.m. Let's go.
Yeah. Imagine having all kinds of fantasy content to make, and so we got to slip these podcasts in where we can. Fortunately, in order to help us with that, we have one Michael Florio, coworker of mine over at NFL Media, and longtime friend and fantasy homie. How you doing, Florio?
I'm doing well. I'm glad we're all on the East Coast, on the West Coast. Because I feel like it would have been a disadvantage if one of you guys were on the East Coast and you
Yep.
weren't. It wasn't 8:30 a.m. for all of us.
Yep. Now we're all on an even playing field. Fortunately, I think. Well, we'll see how much debate we get into. This podcast is going to be a lot of opinion about what we expect, but it's going to be a lot of prediction. We are talking about offenses that have new play callers, new schemes, new coaching, things we expect potentially, though maybe some won't be so drastic, to change heading into this next season. Big factor in figuring out what's going to come for fantasy football, because if you expect to predict on what has been and what has been is gone and there's something completely new, well, you're not going to be too hot. Before we get into that, though, Florio, just give us a little rundown, what you do, where you are, what you're producing, all that good stuff.
Yeah, most of the stuff over at with you, Okada, over at NFL.com. We have the fantasy football podcast right now that's coming out pretty much daily now. We got NFL Fantasy Live is back. We're 3 days a week right now, but we will be 5 days a week from next week on. So set your DVRs, and then doing some writing content over there. And rotoballer.com is another big place. I've done a lot of written content. I got my podcast, Florio's Football Show, over there. And if you're still not sick of me and my content, I do a show on Sunday afternoons on Rotoballer Radio on Sirius XM with myself and Scott the King Engel. So lots of different venues right now if you're trying to get some of my fantasy work.
Beautiful. All right, we'll check all that out. But let's hop into these offenses. We will start with the one probably to get the most hype and intrigue, although maybe not hype for the right reason in some cases, and that is the Chargers, who go from Kellen Moore, who we'll get to later in this show, and his high-flying offenses, to Jim Harbaugh at head coach and Greg Roman at offensive coordinator. It is as about a drastic a shift, theoretically, as you can get in styles and schemes, or at least that's what we might expect from what we've seen from these two coaches in the past. But they have a different offense. They have a different set of players. Maybe things will change. Florio, I'll kick it to you first. Obviously, the big question here is, how run heavy is this team going to be? Is Justin Herbert going to become a game manager or something like that? What do you expect in LA?
That is my fear. I still think, look, they're never gonna make Justin Herbert play like he's where he's only throwing like 15 times a game, but it might not be much more than that, I think. And that is the fear. And typically, so like I looked back at Jim Harbaugh, his tenure with the 49ers, and in that span, they ranked second to last in pass attempts. And then you look at what he did in Michigan. He was eighth highest in run percentage. Then let's take Greg Roman into account. He's been an OC for 10 different seasons in his NFL career. In all 10 of those seasons, his offenses have finished top 10 in rushing yards and attempts. 7 different times they have been top 3 in rushing attempts. So I think when you put these two together, they're going to just run, and they're going to run a ton, which is why I'm throwing a lot of shots on Gus Edwards. I'm throwing a lot of shots on Kamani Vidal, but I'm not nearly as high on the Chargers receivers. Like, I like Ladd McConkey. I love him as an individual talent, but even he is someone that I'm only kind of spreading out a bit in like my early best ball drafts. And now that we're heading into redraft season, I don't really, thinking about it, I don't think I have him on any of my redraft teams yet, because people are still, you don't have to pay full price for him, but you have to take him as like your wide receiver 4. And there's just other players going in that area that I tend to be a little bit more drawn to. But Yeah, I have concern. Like, I did take Justin Herbert in the super flex league as my second quarterback, but that's because he went after names like Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins and Matthew Stafford, all of these guys. So I think I got him out either right around QB 20 or maybe just outside of it. And I was like, okay, at that point, I'm in. I'll take the upside shot on Justin Herbert. But yeah, I'd rather Jared Goff. I'd rather Tua Tagovailoa. A lot of guys who were very used to Justin Herbert going way before in drafts. Those are guys that I'd rather have now than him.
John, we've talked a lot about the receiver depth chart and how things we maybe expect to break down, but as an overall look, how are you feeling?
This is an interesting podcast to discuss because this does go back to just to give subscribers and listeners a picture, snapshot into the projections process. I start with the play caller and the quarterback for each team, and I'm looking at pass run splits and I'm looking at plays per game, and that drives a lot of the team stats between the play caller and the quarterback. So, when Greg Roman lands with the Chargers, yeah, I think you're looking at they're going to want to run the ball a lot. I think that's going to be the desire. I think we have mentioned before that this defense is not good. They were fifth in yards allowed last year. Whether or not they're going to be able to run the ball as much as they want to is to be determined. I think their pass percentages will be a little bit higher than what they would like in an ideal situation. But looking at Greg Roman, it's pretty scary. He plays at a run heavy and a slightly high pace in terms of plays per game. But in every one of his 10 seasons, when he's been the offensive coordinator, his team was in the top 9 in rush attempts. I believe that they had the league low in pass attempts 4 times. They were second lowest in pass attempts another 3 times.
That's
the only time, like they were 29th or lower or 28th or lower in pass attempts rank in 9 of his 10 seasons. He did have one season, 2021 Baltimore, where they were actually third in rushing attempts and 9th in passing attempts. So the offense was humming that year. So yeah, I think if you could pick the right running back here, probably Gus Edwards, but J.K. Dobbins is on Twitter claiming that he's ready to go, and he's a known to be dubious about his own health in terms of his trustworthiness. And they got the rookie there, but all as well. I do think that even if you are trying to run the ball 55% of the time, there's still quite a few pass attempts there, and they are going to need to get production out of McConkey. And my favorite sleeper, one of my favorite sleepers, Josh Palmer. Yep. This is not going to be a high flying offense, but there is fantasy production to be had here, and I do think they'll be a little more pass heavy than they want to be.
Okay, so before I give my thoughts, I'm just curious because you both have hit on the ranks of the pass quite a bit. They've always been bottom whatever or top whatever if you're talking rushing. If you had to just give your guess, John, maybe you have the offensive numbers and your projections aggregated, but rank in pass attempts. You could say bottom X or the overall number. What would your guys' ballpark be?
Go ahead, Michael. I will try to figure it out over here in my Excel spreadsheet.
So a number of 10, like Herbert and who?
Just the Chargers offense. If you at the end of the year when we look at the offensive pass attempts, where will they rank? You have to give me an exact number, and I will hold it to you for the next year.
In pass attempts, I'll say 24th.
Okay, so bottom 9, I believe that's how that works. John, do you have your number?
I will in one moment.
Okay.
That was me pulling it out of thin air.
That's exactly what I wanted. I was just curious.
Well, I can tell you. Yeah, I can tell you where I've got them projected right now in terms of pass attempts. It's 25th.
Okay, so that's right there.
Yeah, that's a bit. That's going to be a bit higher than what I think most people have, but I think there is some concern about the defense there, and I think they'll be a little bit more pass heavy than they want to be.
Yeah, so my number would have been 10th fewest, which is 23rd. So we're right there all in a row. So this is for me a little bit more of a chicken and egg. I agree with everything you guys said, but I think there is this chicken and the egg question that we've hit on this podcast several times this last month. How much is the players? How much is the coaching? Greg Roman, you guys hit on all the numbers. His quarterbacks over that span have been Tyrod Taylor and Lamar Jackson for the vast majority of that span. So that means something. Now, did he get hired because those were the guys and people knew that he had rushing ability? Maybe a little bit. Is the rushing we've seen from them maybe a little bit exacerbated by how much Greg Roman likes to run and run with his quarterbacks? Maybe. But what we do know for sure is Justin Herbert is not those guys. He's mobile, he can scramble, but he is not Tyrod Taylor or Lamar Jackson by any means. And even back in San Francisco, when they were from 2011 to 2014 together, Harbaugh and Roman, they had Colin Kaepernick for the majority of that time. They did have Alex Smith for a little portion, and they did still run the ball a good amount during that time. But I think that there's maybe a little too much is being thrown into the concept of how much these guys run because of who they've had at quarterback. And Justin Herbert, Lamar is also great at throwing, but Justin Herbert, I think, is the best pocket passer that these coaches have ever had. They don't have the greatest wide receiver core necessarily. Hopefully McConkey and Palmer both step up, so that might play into things a little bit. Obviously, they went and got 2 Ravens running backs, so I agree very much they intend to run the ball, and they will be one of the more balanced teams in the league. But I do think it ends up more in that like 9th, 10th fewest pass attempts rather than 2nd or 3rd fewest pass attempts, which is what a lot of people I think are fearing, and when they're drafting are putting into those players. So if you take it at those numbers, which is just kind of a pretty balanced offense, I think a lot of the pass catchers and Herbert end up being values in drafts right now because they're so lowered by exactly what we've talked about. John and I love drafting Josh Palmer. I think McConkey, he has risen a bit, but if he is the number one in that offense, I think he ends up being a value. I'm starting to warm up to just drafting Justin Herbert a little bit. He's late enough that if you're going late round quarterback, he's a decent guy.
I had hoped that maybe he'd have a career year rushing wise, because like you said, all of those guys that they've ever had, big time. And I don't think he's going to become Lamar or Taylor or even Kaepernick going back to that era. But I was like, hey, maybe he gets a career high in rushing yards, and then this plantar fasciitis happened, and I was like, that probably takes that off the board.
Yeah, those are tough, lingering injuries. All right, well, that's a great start. Very hot. I like it. Good stuff. Let's go to another team. We will hop to the Falcons. Now, this is maybe more about who left than about who arrived. Zach Robinson is a new OC. He is from the Sean McVay tree, was a pass game coordinator and quarterbacks coach there with the Rams for a good amount of time. We've seen that obviously play out pretty well for many offenses around the league. But of course, what really matters here is Arthur Smith is gone. He was the head coach, but he was in charge of making this offense do what it did. I would say making this offense go, but it didn't really go. So that's not the right language. John, I'll throw it to you first because I know you love talking about Arthur Smith. How much do you see this offense changing? Obviously, big change in personnel as well, particularly at the quarterback position.
I think we're looking at a increased level of competency in terms of featuring your best players and having like trustworthy usage for Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts and Drake London. I think we're just looking at Zach Robinson as coming off the Sean McVay coaching tree. His numbers are pretty average in terms of pass splits, slightly slow on pace in terms of McVay. So I just usually when I have a play caller coming from a tree, another coach's coaching tree, I'll just start with that, with their numbers as the baseline and kind of go from there until we start to see some differences and see them doing different things. But yeah, I think it's just in general with the Falcons, we're just looking at increased competency, and I think we're feeling more bullish about all these skill players.
Florio, how in are you on certain people whose names might rhyme with tile bits?
I'm very in on tile bits and all of the Falcons. Like I have Drake London as a wide receiver 1. I have Bijan Robinson as my RB2 behind only CMC. And Kyle Pitts to me is a top 6 tight end. And I think there's a sweet spot in drafts where, like, if you don't want to pay up for the elite tight ends, you could still get elite tight end upside with either Kincaid or Kyle Pitts. And yeah, it's largely because Arthur Smith isn't there, but I do trust Zach Robinson coming from that McVay system. Some others are Matt LaFleur, Kevin O'Connell, Zach Taylor, Shane Waldron, Thomas Brown. A lot of history of success coming out of that coaching tree. But even more than that, last year, the two Falcons quarterbacks were bottom 2 in catchable target rate. Kirk Cousins was top 2. The year prior to that, Kyle Pitts had the highest rate of uncatchable targets in the NFL. I just think the upgrade at quarterback, and not just with Kirk Cousins, like we could feel at least somewhat comfortable that if Michael Penix has to come in, it's an upgrade as well. So the quarterback play, the coaching change, all of that, I think it's why so many of us are expecting finally to see this Falcons offense be what we dream it can be.
Yeah, I'm honestly my main concern lately is that I'm overcorrecting too much for Arthur Smith leaving because I love every player in this offense or every notable player in this offense so much. So I'm trying to temper that, but I like Drake London as a borderline wide receiver 1. I like Kyle Pitts as a elite tier tight end, pretty much, or very, very much at the fringe of it. Bijan Robinson is my RB2 as well. And then I think this is the hottest part for me, but based on what we all have said about the other guys, I really like Kirk Cousins. I know he's coming off an injury, but he's never really been a needs to be mobile guy anyways. I don't know if that matters too much for him. I like him as a solid quarterback, either high-end quarterback 2 if you're in a 2 QB league, a really solid streamer if you're streaming, or if you just punt on quarterback for some reason and you need a quarterback 1 that's probably going to get you 14, 15 points a game pretty reliably. I like Kirk Cousins. I think he's going to be good. I drafted him in the Scott Fish Bowl. So really it is more about him than the offensive scheme in terms of what we're going to see compared to the rest of the league. Because like John said, I think it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. Not going to expect Kellen Moore stuff. Not going to expect Greg Roman stuff. But being somewhere in the middle with the weapons that you have and a very solid quarterback in Kirk Cousins is a pretty good deal. Sounds good to me. All right, let's go. We're just going to follow Arthur Smith. Why not? Let's just go to the Steelers because we have to talk about where Arthur Smith is now gone to. If you've been on Twitter at all recently, you've seen a whole lot of, oh gosh, this team is screwed. They played their quarterbacks for the whole preseason game, and it did not go well. I think they scored 3 points between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. So it could be messy. And, of course, they have Arthur Smith as their offensive coordinator, Florio. Is this good for anybody?
So my original stance on this was like I'm out on Najee Harris, but now the Jalen Warren injury, depending on how severe that is, could change that. But he always utilized 2 running backs, and particularly near the goal line. And last year it was 3 with Cordero Patterson getting heavily mixed in as well. And he is in Pittsburgh now, which is concerning. The only Pittsburgh Steeler I have any interest drafting right now is George Pickens, because you could get him as a wide receiver 3. I have him ranked as a wide receiver 2. I don't think it'll always be pretty, but I do think he'll get a lot of deep ball shots. I think he'll be their go-to guy in the red zone. So one of those situations where I think big plays and volume kind of win the day. We saw him almost make a miraculous catch on the sideline on Saturday. It was just a little out of his reach. The thing is, regardless if it's Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, those 2 quarterbacks like to throw it deep. And that's where George Pickens will be specialized in. So I'm cool with taking Pickens, especially because of my builds. I tend to go 2 wide receivers to either start or get 2 in the first 3 rounds. So I'm taking George Pickens as a wide receiver 3. And when I'm drafting him as that, if I have 2 solid wide receiver, like a 1 and 2 that I feel great about, I want my 3 to be someone that can have those huge spike weeks, and he fits that mold perfectly. So it's really, when it comes to this offense, except if we're talking sleepers or something like that, because I think Justin Fields is a huge one. I know it might not be pretty, but whenever Justin Fields starts, and after watching Russell Wilson on Saturday, I feel confident that Justin Fields will get a chance to start. We know he is a top 10 fantasy quarterback with top 5 upside when he's on the field.
So just quickly on that, that's I assume if you're in a 2 QB league, you might stash him as your 3rd or 4th. if you're in a 1 QB league, you're just watching on waivers or something like that.
Probably, unless I have like
Or really deep
Josh
bench.
Allen, and then
Okay.
or something like that. Then I'm like, if I waited on quarterback, maybe I'll just throw Fields on. But it's more than likely what you said, a wait and see in more than a 2 quarterback league.
Okay, and then I do have to ask before going to John, because it's a big question with how much you talked about Pickens, and I love Pickens this year. As of right now, which is August 19th in the morning, Pacific time, Brandon Ayuk is still floating in the ether. Do you have any concern, or what is your level of concern that he ends up in Pittsburgh, and how much would that affect Pickens for you?
It would affect a whole lot, and I'm really hoping it doesn't happen because 2 of my most drafted wide receivers this year are Ayuk and Pickens. But I've been operating of the mindset I still expect Ayuk back in San Fran. Like,
Okay.
I think they've each been calling each other's bluff. I think the 49ers know that like we are the ones with more power in this dynamic. And I think if you gave Brandon Ayuk truth serum, he'd be like, no, I'd 1,000% rather be a 49er than a Steeler. So I think they're all kind of using the Steelers to get the best deal for themselves.
John, I got to give you your opportunity to insult Arthur Smith.
Yeah, I have. I mean, it's how many straight podcasts where I've called him a donkey play caller. Yeah, so I've been kind of avoiding the Steelers in general, just for that reason. I don't trust him to utilize his best players. Just based on what's happened in Atlanta.
Very fair.
He's extremely run heavy, pretty run heavy, slightly slow pace as well. So not great situation for fantasy. Just a couple notes on what Michael was saying. Jaylen Warren out, according to your NFL.com website, out multiple weeks.
Yeah.
Week 1 status to be determined.
And it's a hamstring, if I'm not mistaken.
Hamstring, yeah. Late last night that was posted, so I was just looking for updates on that.
Yeah, those are always concerning early in the season.
I do think that Najee Harris probably is going to get a little bump here in the projections. With Jaylen Warren maybe missing 2 additional games, he's going to take a dip. Pickens I would take in certain situations if I needed a idea or the thought of a wide receiver 1, because I do like taking those real world wide receiver 1s in the middle rounds, and he certainly qualifies for that. And it does worry me that Drake London was like wide receiver 40 something last year in the same sort of scheme or whatever. And he did have Pickens should have a better quarterback situation than they did in Atlanta. And so that's basically that. Pat Freiermuth maybe, but I'm not too keen on him either. You've kind of talked me into him a little bit, Matt, but I don't know. I was trying to write him up the other day. I was just, trying to pitch him as a value, and I just couldn't bring myself to hit publish. So that's where we are with the Steelers, and I do think I agree as well that it looks like to me Ayuk's going to be back in San Francisco. To me, I think it's like 90-10 now. They offered him $30 million or something, so they got to be close, and it's just a matter of crossing the T's and dotting the I's. So this would be the worst. Like I was like thinking about Ayuk and how good he is, and like okay, he could go somewhere else and be the clear number 1, and that would be great. And getting a trade done would be great because he might go to a pass heavy team and be the number 1. But this is the worst offense for him to go to, playing for Arthur Smith. Just you have no weekly consistency in his role, and he would take a big dip in the rankings if that were to happen. But I don't think it's going to.
Yeah. The main issue here is if you have multiple talented players at a position, Arthur Smith is going to find a way to not give it to the right guy as much as he's supposed to. So Ayuk coming would be doubly bad, I think, for both of the receivers here. The nice thing about go ahead, Florio.
If we could just say one, look, I don't like Arthur Smith, but if we could say one nice thing about him,
Smith defense,
he was a good OC with the Titans in the sense of he just force-fed A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry the ball. Like I think he needs a head coach to kind of and Mike Tomlin could be the one to be like, cut out all of this other stuff, do what we hired you to do, and get our best players the ball.
Okay, I have not heard this defense all year. I kind of like it. We'll see how fully I get convinced by it. But for now, because Pickens is the only viable wide receiver, unless you're like dipping down to the deep Roman Wilson levels, I think he has a good chance of just getting peppered more in that A.J. Brown way. And then at the tight end position, it's Darnell Washington is the other guy. Last year in Atlanta, we saw just horrific usage of Jonnu Smith. And by horrific, I mean way too much, because we wanted the ball to go to Kyle Pitts, but it went to Jonnu Smith. But as John has mentioned many times on this podcast this year, Jonnu Smith is actually a pretty good tight end, very athletic, who, scores, makes good plays. Darnell Washington is not that. He's a massive guy. He'll probably have one jump ball touchdown at some point. But Pat Freiermuth is the much better tight end, in my opinion. And I have specifically pitched him in a tight end values article. So if you have drafted him or want to draft him and get that confirmation bias that John wasn't willing to give, you can go find that. Among the things Arthur Smith has done, one of them is target the tight end position at an extremely high rate. 34% of pass attempts last year was the most in the league. He's ranked top 4 in all those 3 years in Atlanta. How much will things change when he's back to being the OC, like Florio mentioned, and there's a head coach ahead of him who is probably going to be pretty, this is the way that I run my football team, because he's been doing it for a while and doing it very successfully for a while. We'll see. But for as long as there is one good wide receiver, one good tight end, I do like both of them as a value. The running back situation is harder because as long as Jalen Warren is healthy, I expect Arthur Smith to be extremely frustrating. But this hamstring thing that you guys brought up is concerning. I do not like when a player deals with a hamstring injury in the preseason, in the late offseason. It tends to linger. It tends to lead to other injuries. It's messy. So I agree that Najee Harris is probably becoming a pretty big value. I think I'd be avoiding Jalen Warren right now until his price dips big, if at all. We'll see. We'll probably all be hating Arthur Smith once again by the end of this year. That's just how things go. But let's move on. Okay, we can leave Arthur Smith behind. Thank goodness. Let's go on to something much more exciting. We'll talk about the Eagles. We mentioned Kellen Moore a couple times earlier in this show. They picked up Kellen Moore as their offensive coordinator. Previously with the Cowboys and then the Chargers. Obviously, great offenses. The Chargers had a lot of injuries last year, so things kind of fell off for them. It's tough to judge him too emphatically on what happened there in LA. But from what we have seen from him over the years, lots of deep ball, lots of 3 wide receiver sets, lots of passing. Last year, before he got injured, Keenan Allen was leading the NFL in targets. He was getting absolutely hammered with targets. We've got a bunch of stars here in this offense. John, I'll throw it to you first. How much do you expect this to elevate things, particularly after what we saw from Philly down the stretch last year when this offense kind of became a mess?
Yeah, the Eagles really kind of benefiting here by nabbing Moore. He was the scapegoat for Mike McCarthy with the Cowboys, ended up with the Chargers for a year, and then they completely redo their whole front office coaching staff. So Moore's a free agent again, not getting the head coaching opportunities that maybe his offenses have been pretty consistently good. Top half of the season, or top half of the league in 5 straight seasons in terms of passing yards. Pretty good in rushing yards as well. They weren't great last year with the Chargers, but otherwise top 17 in 4 straight years with 3 top 10 finishes in rushing yards. So this is a good fit. I don't know. He's a little pass heavy in LA and kind of up and down in Dallas, depending on what was going on with the team. Very fast paced. So this could be pretty exciting and a good way to, whatever problems the Eagles were having last year offensively, I think Kellen Moore will be able to fix them. And they're obviously going to be a little more run heavy with Jalen Hurts and all his carries and everything. But I think the yards per attempt and all that kind of stuff's going to increase for the Eagles.
Florio?
I agree. And I was very excited about the Chargers offense last year, largely because of Kellen Moore. And like you said, Okada, the injuries really took it away before it even began. We lost Austin Eckler in week 1. Shortly after that, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen this time, Herbert, their O-line. Like it was just a mess. But in his 4-year tenure in Dallas, the 3 years that Dak Prescott stayed healthy, they were top 6 in points scored in all 3 years. And to everything you guys said, they throw a lot. They use a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. They throw deep at a higher rate than league average. And the biggest thing to me is they use a lot of motion. And that is something that neither Devonta Smith or A.J. Brown ever really had in their career. In fact, in the last 2 years in Philly, neither one of them has even reached double-digit targets while in motion. Whereas last year, Keenan Allen had 54 and turned them into almost 450 yards. So I think first, let's remember how good AJ Brown was before the Eagles offense collapsed last year. Like to me,
Yep.
AJ Brown is underrated, even though he's the wide receiver 6. I think he belongs in the top 5. And I think it's possible that one or both of him and Devonta Smith are in store for career years this year, as long as everyone stays healthy.
Ooh, I mean, I like the sound of that. I think it's really important to point out that pre-collapse thing, and I haven't heard a great explanation or theory on what happened to the Eagles because it's
Big Dom
not
got
like,
fired.
yeah, it was just like out of nowhere. It seemingly they became just terrible, really on both sides of the ball. But before that, to your point, Florio, I think AJ Brown was top 3 wide receiver in fantasy before the injury, if I'm not
It was like
mistaken.
100 and something yards in like 9 straight games. Or
Yeah,
he was
Tyreek
off
Hill.
the charts.
Tyreek Hill was shredding it, but I think AJ Brown was right there with him. I not only do I expect it to go back to that, but to your point about motion, we've seen that be one of the most effective and clear signs of a good offense is how much you're using motion. That is such a big part of today's NFL. If a team is doing that a lot, the 49ers, you're going to see typically that offense is better. And it makes sense because the defense is trying to figure out what you're doing. They're trying to set up for what's coming. And if things are moving as plays are starting, it's a lot harder to do that. It's really one of the best ways to judge how modern and then if the players are good, how successful can that offense be? Moore does it a lot. I like that a lot. What you mentioned about the deep ball targets, I like that for Devonta Smith a ton. AJ Brown as well, but I think that boosts Devonta Smith a little bit more. So that makes me in love with both these wide receivers. I'm pretty strongly leaning towards AJ Brown as my wide receiver 5 these days over Justin Jefferson.
Same.
Yeah. So and if he's where he was last year before things fell apart, that should be very doable. And then I've always loved Devonta Smith. I think he's consistently underrated. And now if you have an offensive coordinator and an offensive scheme that's going to lean into his skill set, that's really good as well. I think that maybe some of this makes up for whatever Jalen Hurts might lose in a few tush-push touchdowns that fall off, if that happens. I think this maybe elevates him a little bit. And I think Saquon Barkley will be very good because this offense is, well, so specifically relative to what we've seen from him, because I think it's very clear this offense will be better than the one he's had maybe his entire career. This probably should be the best offense he's ever played on, which means we might see a lot of touchdown opportunity for him as long as Jalen Hurts doesn't steal it like he did from DeAndre Swift all of last year. I think I like every player pretty much in this offense. Jalen Hurts is my QB2 or QB3. He's right there with Mahomes. So really, really solid stuff all the way down for this team. Good get, Philly. All right. We will move to an offensive coordinator who, unlike Kellen Moore, did get his head coaching shot and did not do too well with it, and that's Cliff Kingsbury, who is now with the Washington Commanders. Whatever you want to say about Cliff Kingsbury as a head coach, which there are many that probably aren't the kindest, his offenses have been pretty good, specifically when Kyler Murray is healthy, and they've been pretty fun for most of that time and exciting. You're not going to get the Greg Roman stuff here, mostly. Florio, I'll throw it to you first. What do you expect for this Washington team where it feels like we're not really talking about the players all that much? Should we be?
I think so. I'm excited for this Commanders offense. One, you hit the nail on the head there. They're not always good as offenses, but they're always fun. And I am a sucker for fun. I always say you can be bad if you are fun. You cannot be bad and be boring. That's how you get fired in the NFL. But looking back on his offenses, 3 of his 4 years and control of the Cardinals offense, they finished top 10 in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. I think we're going to see a heavy dosage of Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler this year. I'm an Austin Eckler guy. I feel like that's the island side of the two things here. But he himself has said like he was never healthy at any point last season. So at him going in the double-digit rounds, I'm willing to roll those dice there. But Jaden Daniels is the one to really get excited about here. He is probably my most drafted quarterback right now. I love Anthony Richardson. I love Kyler Murray. But I keep saying to myself, like, I could take Richardson in the 5th, Kyler in like the 6th or 7th, or I could wait till like the 8th, 9th round and get Jaden Daniels. And that's what I keep doing because you look at Kyler Murray under Cliff Kingsbury, top 12 in fantasy points per game every single season. And he was top 7 in 3 of those 4 years. His rookie year, I think he was 10 or 11. After that, he was much higher. So I think we're going to see Jaden Daniels run a whole bunch. I think it's going to lead to really good things for fantasy. Plus, the playmakers around him, I think, might be a little bit better than they get credit for. Like, I am a Terry McLaurin stan. He can read. He's a huge value right now, I think, as a wide receiver 3, because I feel like that's his floor. And I think there's a case to be made that come the end of this season, we're going to be like, yeah, Jaden Daniels is the best quarterback Terry McLaurin has ever had. So I like that. I know it's popular right now to poo-poo Jahan Dotson, but where he's going in drafts, I've been throwing some late round dart throws on him because he's transitioning to the slot now. And I think that is a fantasy friendly role in this system, but more than any, like I like Terry McLaurin. I like Dotson as a dart throw. I'm in on Eckler. Even Robinson at cost is fine, but Jaden Daniels is the crown jewel in this offense.
John, you've hit on Jaden Daniels a few times this offseason. How does he fit into Cliff Kingsbury and vice versa? What does this do for everybody there?
Yeah, I just took Jaden Daniels as my number 2 quarterback in the Superflex charity point per first down league that I launched last week. Excited about that. BetSperts and Sleeper have ponied up some money for a good cause, so we'll see who can win that money for their charities.
Right.
Hopefully, Jaden Daniels leads my team to victory.
Yeah.
Yes, looking forward to seeing him in this offense. Kingsbury, slightly pass heavy, very fast paced in terms of plays per game, which bodes well for everybody involved if they can play at that pace with a rookie quarterback. I do think they'll try to, I wouldn't say hide Daniels, but limit his exposure a bit and try to be, run the ball pretty consistently. But he's obviously a good arm talent and can run the ball. If you're going to draft him, just do not look up that video of him getting completely lit up by tacklers when
Which
he was
one?
running in LSU.
Yeah.
There's a few. It was like I was like, oh my god, this guy does not take care of his body, so he needs to learn how to do that for sure. Yeah, I think this is a pretty good situation for him with Kingsbury as his OC, and really the bottom line is that they're very fast paced, and more plays equals more fantasy points.
Yeah, I think largely I haven't drafted much of the rest of this team. Maybe I'll get a little bit hotter on them with some of Florio's takes there. But it is Jaden Daniels for me all the way through. Kyler Murray is my most drafted player this offseason, Florio. But
no surprise.
Right after that at quarterback, it would probably have to be Jaden Daniels. And uncoincidentally, probably, he is going to be filling the Kyler Murray role in this offense. He is a very, very, very good runner who is also a very good passer. And that is not common. A lot of the quarterbacks we see who have rushing ability and we love them for fantasy, that is their thing, and they're not really strong passers. Jaden Daniels is a really strong passer. John's mentioned it, the reception perception stuff with him, most accurate passer in this class. Kyler Murray has always been that. He is a very good, very accurate passer. I think that this is a great fit. I think it's probably intentional, this fit. And I think that Jaden Daniels will be unlocked to be probably top 3 or 4 in terms of rushing quarterback fantasy points, and then be good enough as a passer, top 12, top 15 even should be enough with that kind of rushing upside to where he is a strong QB1, a locked and loaded QB1. And somehow he's still going as QB 12 or so in aggregate ADP right now. I don't understand it. I feel like he should be much higher than that. I would probably have him around 8. It's confusing to me, but I'm drafting him everywhere. The rest of the guys, we'll see. The tough thing really is the running backs. There's 2 who both could be equally involved, and I don't know if I trust Austin Eckler. Yes, he was injured. I agree for all of last season, but he's also old, and running backs getting old is not a good thing. So maybe it's Brian Robinson. I think he maybe is a little bit more involved at the goal line, though Austin Eckler's always been good at that in his career.
He's been better than Robinson.
Yeah, despite his size. And then at the wide receiver position, I like Terry McLaurin. And if Jaden Daniels is going to be a good passer, somebody's going to catch these passes. So I'll draft a little Terry McLaurin. After that, I'm not so sure. Jahan Dotson is so confusing. He's one of the most polarizing players, I feel like, because his rookie season, It was like, whoa, look at this guy scoring. I think it was 7 touchdowns with no quarterback play. Hasn't really ever had it, to your point. Jaden Daniels should be his best quarterback. But last year he was nothing, and they were passing the ball a ton with Sam Howell, good or not good in terms of, quality passes. They were passing it a ton, and Jahan Dotson was not useful. So both of those are tough ones for me. I'm just eschewing everything else and focusing on Jaden Daniels for the most part. But I do agree it should be a fun, interesting offense. All right, let's go to one that maybe won't be. We're bouncing back and forth here. We're going to go to the Raiders. This one is not one I've really heard talked about much at all. And you know what? Maybe it's fair enough. The Raiders are not the most exciting team, but they have some good fantasy players, or at least some players who could be good in fantasy. They brought in Luke Getsy as their offensive coordinator, who was formerly with the Bears and were a heavily run-first team, though, of course, they had Justin Fields. Again, there's the chicken and the egg situation. Justin Fields is probably more likely to make you run the ball a lot than maybe any other quarterback in the NFL. So that's a thing. However, he is also coming in to coordinate under Antonio Pierce, who in terms of head coaches that aren't necessarily going to be in charge of the offense, but who still have a philosophy, in my mind, is going to be one of the more, we want to pound the ball, we want to run the rock. Zamir White, what does that do for him? Obviously, Devontae Adams is the biggest question here. They did just name Gardner Minshew as their starting quarterback, at least for week 1, which I prefer. John, I'll throw it to you first. What does this mean anything for you? Do you expect things to change drastically? And what do you think of the pieces as a result?
Well, you summed it up, very run heavy, also slow paced. So that's not a good combination if you're looking for pass catchers. Devontae Adams should be okay because he's just going to get so many targets and he earns so many targets, but he's not the top 5, top 7 type receiver that we've been used to seeing. He's more of a low end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2. And I think he's fair at his ADP right now. If you're kind of looking for your wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 in that second, third round. But yeah, I think this all bodes well for Zamir White, who the buzz on him has been pretty good. I think there's been some concern that he's just another guy, not really an elite runner or anything like that, but he's going to see tons of volume. He gets positive yards. They like him a lot. He's been playing a lot, in terms of the drives with the starters. And I think he's going to be a volume-based kind of RB2. And he's going RB2, RB3 in terms of the projections. And, given what he did at the end of last season, I think it does make me a little worried because this is the same kind of process that I used for Alexander Madison going into last year.
Yep.
And so that's the concern. And now Madison is on this team. So I don't know if that is
the reverse Madison.
Yeah. I'm not, this is a little bit of an alarm bell in the back of my head, but the same process has also led me to other players that really did well when they got their chance, like Michael Turner and Lamont Jordan and Chester Taylor. And these are, I'm dating myself, but these are RB2s that got their chance and went on to have, good, solid fantasy seasons. Zamir White's not somebody I'm going after, but if I need a running back in those 7th round or whatever, then I think you're getting a lot of touches at that point in the draft. And I think he's capable of, making it work.
Florio gave a very emphatic yes to the Alexander Madison's note. Do you have little faith here?
I think that Zamir White could be a much better real life back than fantasy back, because my fear is that he is this year's Alexander Madison in the sense of really good in you had a 4-game stint where you were the guy, but now can we see you do it when defenses are planning for you over 17 games? His usage in the preseason is scary to me. Like, he's playing well deeper into the game than starters do. And when he's out there, he's splitting time with Alexander Madison. Then they have a number of pass catching back options that they're trying out. So if Zamir White isn't going to catch many passes, I don't think he's going to get enough scoring opportunities where he's more than kind of where you're drafting him at. I view him, I think best case scenario is he has like a Najee Harris type season where like it's a lot of RB3 finishes with a couple of big weeks where touchdowns elevate him or something like that. And I think the floor is that he kind of bottoms out and it's a committee here and he's not really anyone you want to trust. I want no parts of the Devontae Adams either. And I'm not touching this Raiders offense. If I'm
Ooh,
touching it,
dang.
it's probably for Brock Bowers.
Fair.
Devontae Adams, I get it. One, I don't think Devontae is going to get drafted where he's been getting drafted all summer. That's when us sickos draft and we're in this day to day. But like I look at consensus rankings on like Fantasy Pros, Devontae Adams is top 10. And I think when more normal people who don't do this every single day start drafting, Devontae Adams is going to go as a wide receiver 1. But even if he continues to go as a borderline 1-2 like he is, last season he had the highest target share by any player since 2019. He was top 3 in air yards and red zone targets. Like the volume was off the charts good, and he was wide receiver 15 in points per game. Now, I understand that like quarterback play was really bad, and I do think Gardner Minshew has a better deep ball than Jimmy G and AOC. But when I looked at their numbers last year, besides on the deep ball, they were almost the exact same, Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. And that is very concerning to me. Plus, Devontae Adams is going to be 32 come year's end. His metrics last year slipped. It was the fewest EPA he's ever posted, fewest separation he's ever posted, catch rate, all of this stuff was like his worst of the next gen stats era. So to me, I don't think he has the same ceiling or upside like John was saying. So if his floor is kind of low end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2, and that's where we're drafting him at, what's the floor then? The floor is that the numbers slip, the volume maybe isn't the same, the metrics continue to slip, and you're not getting any sort of discount for that risk baked in. So I think like I have him ranked as like wide receiver 14. I think that's appropriate, but I don't ever find myself in drafts being like, I want Devontae Adams. If I take him, it's usually like all the wide receivers I would have took after him went before me, and I need a receiver.
Yeah. I do think both of you guys have kind of hit on this to a degree. This is kind of a floor team in terms of like Devontae Adams is still going to get his targets, and it's going to be hard to not be a top 15 wide receiver with that kind of target share. So I don't see the floor falling out, but I do agree with what you just said, Florio, that he's not going to be the wide receiver 1. I don't think that's in the cards, whereas that has been the case for him most every other year. And then same thing with Zamir White. I don't think there's a chance he's not only the RB1, but I don't think there's a chance he's a top 5 RB. Maybe he could squeak into RB1 territory if he gets enough touchdowns, which would require this offense to be pretty good. But I do think he gets so many carries because I think this team leans on the run and just feeds him. Even if Alexander Madison does get work or Dylan Laube starts getting catches, which I hope for because I've drafted him in a couple places, including the Scott Fishbowl, I still think Zamir White will be a 250 carry plus guy, and they may be 3.5 yards per carry. But if he gets 7-8 touchdowns, that ends up being valuable essentially where he's going. I would agree with what John said that I'm not reaching or trying to draft Zamir White anywhere. But he's kind of in this running back sweet spot, I think, where you get a ton of values, in my opinion. Kind of that 6th, 7th round area where you're Aaron Jones, James Conner, Ramondre Stevenson, White, Raheem Mostert comes a little after that, Najee Harris now. I think there's a lot of these guys there that whether they're a little older or they're not in good offenses, for some reason, we kind of have pushed them down a little bit and maybe fairly, but as a result, I think they've become value. Zamir White is one of those. So I like him. I will also say, as crazy as this is, I believe Gardner Minshew is a really solid QB upgrade. It's hard for your quarterbacks to be bad enough that that's the case. But he's been quite good at supporting fantasy value. He's not necessarily going to be the most winningest quarterback, but I think he can support fantasy players. And so I like Devontae Adams if you're getting him after the wide receiver 10-11 range and you're just looking for floor. I like Zamir White if you ideally are getting your RB2 and you're getting a nice floor RB2. I do think the upside is going to be limited here. And Getsy being the OC and, to John's point of the slower offense, that matters a lot in that regard. It really does cap the upside. So maybe some values here, but maybe they're just going where they should. We'll see. All right, let's move to the Seahawks. The Seahawks have picked up Ryan Grubb as the offensive coordinator, who is the first guy that we are talking about that's not coming from another NFL team, but is instead coming from the Washington Huskies, who obviously have had a very good offense. Formerly in Seattle was Shane Waldron. The one note that I have on Shane Waldron that I've been harping on this season, he ran the slowest offense in the NFL over the last 3 years in Seattle. And for much of that time, it wasn't close. So I expect this offense will get faster. Will that be enough to elevate players on it? Florio, I'll throw it to you first. What do you expect from Ryan Grubb? It's obviously a little harder to predict coming from college.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, though, with the last season and in the last 3 years, fewest offensive plays ran for the Seahawks. So that obviously makes it harder to put up fantasy success. But what I'm expecting is a lot of pass plays. 62% of his plays last year were passing plays. That was 8th highest amongst Power 5 schools, 4th highest rate of deep pass attempts, 6th in explosive pass rate. So I expect a lot more downfield shots. That's something we've seen with Seattle in the past, like with Russell Wilson. They were slow paced, but they would chuck it downfield a lot. I think we're gonna get faster paced, but a lot more chucking it downfield still. So I think DK Metcalf could potentially reach new heights. I don't think a lot of people realize that over the last 3 years, DK has not been a top 15 wide receiver, like ever in points per game. So I think he has untapped upside. Like he could potentially be a low end wide receiver 1, probably more of a high end wide receiver 2, but I think he could be better than we've seen in recent years. I think JSN brings breakout upside because I think this is the year he surpasses Tyler Lockett. Lockett's metrics really took a big hit last year. He's 32, going to be 33. I think when they drafted JSN, it was like year 2 is when you are going to take over. And then I'm also interested in Kenneth Walker here. With the way that Grubb and the new coaches have been talking up Kenneth Walker as like the every down back and everything like that, I think there's untapped upside with him as well. Remember after his rookie year, before they drafted Charbonnet, we were talking about him being a potential top 5 fantasy running back. I still think he has the same explosiveness and upside and everything. He just needs the bulk of the touches. So Seattle was an offense that before I dove into the new coaching staff, I was like, yeah, I'm probably not going to have a bunch of. But then after, I'm like, no, I think at cost, a lot of their guys are values right now.
John, I'd be really curious what you do projections wise in this case, and then what comes out of that, given we don't have an NFL offense history to base on.
Yeah, so with Ryan Grubb, I look at his pass splits at Washington and also at Fresno State. If you look at the last 4 years, 56.1%. That's a little bit higher than the NFL average. Now things aren't, apples to apples comparison there, between college and the NFL, but that's a starting point. And then quite fast. If you look at his pace, number of plays per game compared to the college average, he was 6% higher. So I have him projected for 64.1 plays per game, which is significantly higher than the mean, 61.0 for my projections this season. So this all bodes well, being pass heavy and being fast for the pass catchers. And I have Metcalf at wide receiver 12, which would be his highest finish. He did, I just look at week 1 through week 17. He was wide receiver 15 and then 17 the year before. So he's been a solid to high end wide receiver 2. And I think there is some meat on the bone, as Michael was saying. Smith and Jigba probably takes over the number 2 role, with Lockett already dealing with a hamstring injury, missing some time. But don't be surprised if Tyler Lockett is like wide receiver 50 or 55, 60 off the board. It's a really good asset in best ball, especially because you're not going to want to try to count on him on a weekly basis, but he's still good enough where he's going to have some big weeks. I think generally speaking, I'm pretty bullish about this offense.
Yeah, I pretty much agree across the board with everything you just said. Metcalf is right there, the wide receiver 1 fringe for me, which is a huge value where his cost is right now. Wide receiver 21 in aggregate ADP. That is a huge gap, especially this high in wide receiver draft position. I love Lockett as a best ball guy. If his injury lingers and this team does end up being very pass heavy or decently pass heavy and running a lot of plays, JSN is going to have his chance at targets. And if he does get his chance at targets, I do believe still, and I think most people would, he's a very, very good player. He was a great prospect. If he gets his chance, we should see a breakout. How big of the breakout? TBD, but enough to be valuable for fantasy in some regards. I agree. Kenneth Walker is a very strong running back who's probably being underdrafted. I think all this makes Geno Smith a value where he's being drafted. So, like the offense, think that it should be better, and I think we get a lot of values out of this team. So I like targeting the players.
I'm glad you mentioned. I'm glad you mentioned Geno Smith and not me. I wasn't going to do it after I touted him as a value last year.
Yeah. Listen, we do not hold things against players if the situation changes, which is the case here. Once again, we will follow the questionable offensive coordinator to their new teams. Shane Waldron went to the Bears. This is maybe one of the most intriguing, besides the Chargers, is what's going to happen with this offense. We've got the 3 wide receivers who are all top tier talents, or should be at some point. Obviously, Odunze is a rookie. The others being Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. Caleb Williams, where we've seen the clips all over Twitter, he's already looking like the Caleb Williams that everybody was expecting when he was drafted number 1. But we talked about what Shane Waldron has done with his offenses: crazy slow, low pass attempts. Low pass attempts is especially tough when we're looking at these 3 wide receivers that we're hoping he can support. Florio, I'll start with you. Can he and the offense do it or not? And do you have any other big takes on the Bears?
I think that my biggest take on the Bears is you want Caleb and not so much any of the individual wide receivers. Like Shane Waldron, you said last 3 years in Seattle, 31st, 15th, 17th in pass attempts in those 10 years. DK Metcalf's best finish in points per game was wide receiver 23. Lockett's was wide receiver 17. Even volume-wise in total points, they never cracked wide receiver 1 range. So that to me, and then we've seen this situation before where Waldron had 2 veterans and he brought in a top rookie and it didn't work out. Although I will say my biggest stance of the weekend is I have flipped Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen in my rankings because it might, I don't know if it's hot takey or not. My thing is, if we're gonna have a slower paced offense where they're maybe not going to be one of the pass happiest teams in the league, you want the big play guy. You don't want the guy who is reliant on volume. I had thought, though, that this would be like DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett out there on 2 wide receiver sets and everything like it was last year. But I don't know. These reports of Keenan Allen being up there in weight and stuff like that, it's a little concerning. It's not like
there's
it's
no way
report.
he weighs that much, right?
I don't think so. But when you see Rome Odunze doing what Rome Odunze is doing, for me at least, I'm a sucker for upside, and that was enough for me to flip it. But Caleb looks special. Odunze looks special. I don't see any way DJ Moore repeats what he did last year. I don't see any way Keenan Allen repeats what he did last year, and I didn't have them ranked as such. But I have Moore as a low-end wide receiver 2, and those other guys in the wide receiver 3 range. So again, not super bullish on any of them. I love their individual talents, but I think it's one of those situations where you want the whole cake, not the frosting. Like you want the quarterback, not the individual pieces.
Where is he for you among quarterbacks? How high? I'd be curious.
I believe I have him at I think I have him at 11 or 12, right behind. He's in the same tier for me as Jaden Daniels and Jordan Love.
Okay, that is high. Wow. All right. John, I know this is a tough team to project, obviously, with all these guys. How does this fall out for you?
Well, we're looking at an offensive coordinator who we were criticizing how he operated with Seattle, now taking over this very young quarterback with 2 vets receivers and a really talented third receiver. Maybe he's the second. I don't know. I have a tough time getting too bullish on the Bears as a Packer fan. I've been watching this team find ways to screw it up and not meet expectations for years and years and years and years. So I don't know that his rookie season is going to go as smoothly as a lot of Bears fans are hoping. I do have him at, I think he's a high-end QB2. I don't have him near the QB1 ranks, but probably 15 or so. One thing I wanted to note on Keenan Allen, like I just got him in this expert league I got him wide receiver 39, and this is a point per first down league where first downs are pretty valuable, and he does a good job of that. Like, his value is so low now that you can get him as a wide receiver 3. He's also, I think this weight thing. I just saw the highlights. He looked like he's fine to me. It looks like they're doing a lot of three receiver sets. Snap counts. DJ Moore 6, Keenan Allen 5, Rome Odunze 5 out of 6 plays with the starters. So he's going to be on the field. So I'm still giving his cost pretty bullish on Keenan Allen. He was like number 3 in the league in points per game last year. He had a career year. I think he's still really good. So the question is, which one of these receivers is going to be able to get the best rapport with Caleb Williams? So that's the key. And they're all coming in fresh with him. It's not like anybody's got an advantage. Keenan Allen wisely, I think, staying in the same apartment complex that Caleb Williams is. So he's got the breakfast with Stafford thing going that Puka had going last year. So I think they could be good. I wouldn't bet my mortgage on it or anything. They should be significantly better in terms of quarterback play if things go well. But I don't know that I don't know that Waldron is the guy that's going to maximize this offense.
Yeah, I don't love the offensive coordinator pickup in terms of exactly what you just said. If they had gotten a guy like Kellen Moore, I would feel much better about this. I will say I did a little bit of a deep dive on teams to produce essentially 3 wide receiver 4s or better. Right now, Odunze is going at wide receiver 42-ish, Allen's at wide receiver 33-ish, and Moore is at wide receiver 22-ish, so that's 3 wide receiver 4s or better. There's been 52 teams to do that. The average passing totals for those teams was 4,458 yards and 30 touchdowns. I do not think Caleb Williams is getting anywhere close to those numbers. Both marks would be top 2 by a rookie all time. And of those 52 teams, 83% of them topped 4,000 yards passing, which is something no Bears quarterback has ever done, let alone a rookie. Yeah, there could be this year. If it's going to be a year, it could be. Or Caleb Williams will do it eventually at some point. The question is whether it'll be this year. And of those 52 teams, only 2 were led primarily by a rookie quarterback. One was Andrew Luck. Obviously, we're hoping Caleb Williams is essentially the next Andrew Luck. So if you're looking for an outlier, that's kind of the idea. The other, by the way, was Gardner Minshew. You want to talk about decent supportive fantasy players. All this being said, I don't think he's going to throw for 4,400 yards and 30 touchdowns. However, to John's point, the values bake that in, I feel like. Odunze at wide receiver 42. I really don't want to sign him up to have him in redraft. I think he's going to be more of a best ball wide receiver. To Florio's point, with the lower plays, you want the explosive big play guy. I do think that will be Odunze, but I don't think you're going to know when it's coming. But in best ball, I think that's a great value. Allen at wide receiver 33. I'm okay with that. I think that's solid. I agree with John. He's still a good wide receiver. He'll see enough targets to fall into that range, even if he just gets close to 100, which, he's smashed in most of his seasons, or at least his pace would have smashed it. And then Moore is going at wide receiver 22. Florio said, I don't think he'll be close to wide receiver 6, which is where he was last year, again this year. I agree with that. But the gap between 6 and 22 is very large, and I think he's most likely to fall somewhere in between there and be 15, 18, which would be a value at draft price. And I also think Caleb Williams is a decent value at draft price, to Florio's point. So I'm not super excited. I don't think any of these guys are going to be like fantasy breaking superstars, but at current value, which is what we care about in fantasy, I don't mind drafting really any of them. I think they're all viable. Really quick, we'll be quick on this last one because we've run long. Dave Canales is now the head coach for the Carolina Panthers. He's not the offensive coordinator, but I think we expect he'll be the play caller, or at least decide how the offense works. They're last here, and we'll be quick because it's the Panthers. There's not a lot here to like, but Florio, does it mean anything for you? Are you interested in grabbing anyone here?
I'm too bullish on this offense, I think. I have Deontay Johnson as one of the biggest wide receiver values. He's going as a wide receiver 4. He is still one of the best separators in football. Last year, I think he had the 3rd highest rate of uncatchable targets. We've seen Dave Canales' offense produce multiple high-end wide receivers. Mike Evans last year, DK and Lockett the year before that. I think that Deontay Johnson is a screaming value at where he is going in drafts, and he is my most drafted wide receiver for a reason. But my biggest league winner pick also comes from this offense, which is probably crazy, but give me Jonathan Brooks. I keep saying he could go the Todd Gurley rookie year route. Todd Gurley tore his ACL on November 15th and then missed 2 games, was eased into the third, and then went for 1,300 yards and like double-digit touchdowns. Jonathan Brooks might not be that good, but he tore his ACL 4 days earlier than Todd Gurley had tore his. It was a clean ACL. He's young. It's his only significant injury. When you have a clean ACL tear at that age, it's basically like a high ankle sprain or something like that. Like maybe he's not completely useful the first couple games, or maybe he even sits out the first couple of games. But I think come the middle portion of the year and on, this guy is going to be a top 20 running back with even more upside. He could do everything on the football field. And I care about winning in January and December, not so much September. So I'll draft him in the 8th round with that injury discount already on, pair him with Chuba Hubbard, get by those early weeks. And then if he hits like I think he can hit, that will change the dynamic of my teams.
John, Florio has come in hot on the Carolina train. Are you getting aboard?
Yeah, I'm totally in on Deontay Johnson. I actually took Christian Kirk ahead of him, hoping that Deontay Johnson would get back in this experts league, and he did not get back to me. Ian Harteets, a curse on his house for taking him, and I probably should have done Deontay and then hope that Kirk got back or somebody else got back. But that's the way it goes. I'm a huge Deontay Johnson fan. Great separator, great route runner. He's really going to help Bryce Young, and Bryce Young actually has several things working in his favor. Number one, he's heading into year 2, which is a time when rookies that quarterbacks that struggle as rookies tend to make a big jump in year 2. He's not have to worry about his job security. Dave Canales now in as the coach is kind of a quarterback whisperer based on his work with Geno Smith. Turned him into a good fantasy real world quarterback. And then obviously Baker Mayfield had a career year last year with the Buccaneers. So those 2 things are working in his favor. Plus they also spent the most that I've ever seen since I've been tracking offensive line spending. So the offensive line should be significantly better. And then, of course, adding Deontay Johnson as a legitimate wide receiver 1 doesn't make me bullish on Bryce Young in terms of his being a fantasy player that I want, but he should be a lot better than the bad quarterback that we saw last year. And that can make this offense, instead of being bottom in the league, could be, bottom 3rd instead of 32nd. And that will lift a lot of boats here, whether it's Deontay Johnson, Jonathan Brooks, or both.
Listen, I set up the alley on how bad this team's supposed to be so that you guys would oop it, and you ooped the heck out of it. I don't even need to say anything else. That's everything that I believe about this offense you guys covered. I like literally everyone as a value. I will draft Bryce Young in the 2 QB league, and I think he could be a solid one if you're going for value at QB2. And I love Jonathan Brooks as a late running back, a league winner. I have him. I think he's my most drafted player actually this year, if I'm not mistaken. I also think Deontay Johnson can be a great value. You guys smash that. This is bold because this team has been bad for a while, and most people would look at the pieces and say it's bad. But I have faith in Dave Canales, and I have faith in the talent of several of these players winning out. So, Panthers fans here on the Most Accurate Podcast. That will wrap us up. Florio, before we check out, just once again, let us know where we can find your stuff, where we can find you on Twitter, all that goodness.
Michael F. Florio, if you saw me tweeting about Elon, that was not me. I don't know what happened. And then NFL.com, NFL Fantasy Live, rotoballer.com for everything else.
Cool. John, anything big coming out this week we should be looking for?
Yeah, my positional articles are coming out this week. The quarterback one was out late last week. But I just wanted to mention one other coordinator change. Brian Callahan to the Titans, just a very brief, extremely pass heavy. Coming out of the Zach Taylor coaching tree. If he is as pass heavy as Taylor was, then Will Levis, Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, they might make some noise there in that passing game.
Yeah. And all the players they have now make much more sense for that. This is no longer the Derrick Henry Titans. Good call. All right. I am Matt Okada. You can find me at Matt Okada on Twitter. It's very easy. Look at that. We will catch you next time. Thanks a ton, Florio. Have a good one.